Netflix has a new series, Unchosen, depicting a high control, apocalyptic, and separatist religious group. My name is Rebecca. I study religion, gender, and violence and recently completed my doctoral dissertation. So I'm excited to be discussing the show and potentially some of the groups that may have inspired the world of Unchosen. I love how the group has a clear separation between themselves and others. By referring to the outside world as unchosen, they are specifically naming this attempted separation. One of the characters says in a conversation, this is, what does she say? Separation is our sole principle. So we're going to get into the nitty gritty. I have literally compiled a little canvas whiteboard of screenshots from the show, if you can see. So I'm going to be going off the screenshots that I have taken and discussing them in relation to several different groups and basically religion as portrayed. Now, I will say at the outset, I think that the setup is fantastic. In episode 1 of the series, you're really looking at world building, establishing the characters, and getting your viewers interested, curious, getting them into the story. It's really interesting that this was released so soon after Trust Me, the False Prophet. And the showrunner talked about listening to cult survivor stories, interviewing people who have escaped from cults or high control religions, as I prefer to call them. And I think she did a fantastic job researching this. So when you create a religion in a fictional series, you really have to make decisions about what that's going to look like. And for it to be believable, it has to be based on the real world. Even if you're creating a completely fictional, cult of Burger King or something, you've got to understand human behaviors and the dynamics of high control religious groups. I will say from my own research that high control religious groups tend to behave in very similar ways and espouse similar tenets because I think for one, people who are attracted to that kind of lifestyle, there's a certain appeal to it. Generally, the process goes, you have a group of people that have come together because they are discontent with the world outside. They believe that the world is ungodly or unchosen, and they need to be more faithful to Jesus and the Bible than any other Christian group out there. And so you open the Bible and you decide, what is the church not being faithful about? How can we be more biblical, more faithful, more zealous? And then you're going to pick out things in the Bible that tell you, do not be conformed to this world, right? Love God with all your heart and soul and strength. Just verses like these, you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. What these groups then come together with this sense of discontent and this desire to live a more biblical and radical lifestyle, possibly motivated by the end of the world or some kind of future apocalyptic judgment. That's why the concept of chosenness is so important. And then there's a sense of expectancy, and so the people who believe this start to come together. It usually coalesce around very charismatic, when I say charismatic, I mean appealing leaders, and then you draw people in through love bombing, through your smiles, through being shiny, happy people with such a loving community. And guess what? People in society outside see this and they're like, this is something I don't have. I don't have this close-knit community. Maybe you get invited for a meal and you're looking around at this big table with beautiful food and the singing, and it feels so different, and yet your heart feels strangely warm, and you start to want to join. And joining might have many hurdles. You might be introduced to things that make you feel uncomfortable, but as you feel that initial discomfort, you're told that this is part of the sacrifice. This discomfort that you're feeling is kind of like this wrestling between your former self, which was in the world, and your new self dedicated to Christ. That gives you a little bit of a picture then of how high control religions of this particular Christian kind really draw in people and draw you into this wonderful possibility. One leader of a high control religious group that wasn't even actually an official church, the Institute of Basic Life Principles, centered around Bill Gothard's teachings, he would say, I'm giving the world a new approach to life. And he draws people in by emphasizing your shining, joyful countenance that's supposed to really, really attract people who are in this sad and miserable world where you wear worldly clothes and listen to dark and disturbing music, when you could be wearing joyful, beaming, clothes and have a wonderful appearance and listen to uplifting, edifying music, for example. So there are many elements of this separation that I think this series does really well. So here in Unchosen, they're not really trying to create things from scratch. I'm going to start with images that kind of capture the religious life in this community. And these are images of the church service and of this joyful picnic after. You start with kind of like a communion service. Everybody is seated around in a circle, and you have the men on one side and you have the women on the other, and then you have the leaders in the center, and they're also participating in communion. So from what is portrayed, I would say that they're not trying to be anything necessarily out of the box. It's not their niche to present a group that's wholly radically different from more conservative mainstream Christian Protestant groups. I think the strongest influence that I'm seeing here is from the Exclusive Brethren. So yeah, I'll just share some of these images that I'm looking at as I discuss them, because I don't want to, get copyright violations, but at the same time I want to be able to discuss these things. So you have this thing of sitting around in a circle. Now, the Exclusive Brethren that are very clearly one of the strongest influences on the series, and that also originate in the UK, would, I think, be the strongest. That's what they're pulling from. Like, I think the Exclusive Brethren, as far as I understand, I've never been to an Exclusive Brethren church service, but I am quite familiar with the Plymouth Brethren, of which they are a part, and their belief system, especially the concept of chosenness and election. I think that's something that is very English, is very Plymouth Brethren. So the reason why Plymouth Brethren sit around in a circle is because they literally practice church services that are interpreted from 1 Corinthians chapter 14, which not only says that women are to be silent in the assembly, as is translated in some versions, but it also says that, if any of you comes with a song, with a prophecy, with a hymn, and that's not really portrayed, but what happens in Plymouth Brethren services would be, you have men and women separate. They take the veiling, head covering in scripture pretty seriously. I think Exclusive Brethren will wear one outside of the services, and Plymouth Brethren, generally women will wear a head covering during services. And then it's kind of more of an ad-lib thing. It's a thing where you sit around and you share. Men specifically are inspired by the Spirit to share a song, to preach, not really preach, but to share a word, to give a testimony, to give a prophecy. And it's not so much liturgical. It's not so the things are not so much set in stone, the order of the service. Everybody, the men are supposed to contribute, and the women will sit and listen. And quite a few churches practices. I know that the high control religious group I was a part of would have practiced this ideally as well, mixed in with preaching. But potentially looking at this, this might be a group where you have a couple of prominent leaders doing teaching here and there, but it might also be something where you have people, the men, contribute by speaking up and reading a piece of scripture, etc., etc. So that's what I'm seeing when I look at the service. You also have examples of different prayer groups, and I will say it's kind of more scripted and more like The Handmaid's Tale / The Testaments, in that in these scenes people seem to know exactly what to say and they're all saying it in unison. I kind of feel that is contrived for the sake of TV drama. Like, I don't think that's something that actually happens, where you kneel around in a circle and everybody instantly knows exactly what to say, especially if you're drawing from the Plymouth Brethren, where they don't have a liturgy, where they don't have a set thing to say, right? Now, you will say things that everybody knows is right. There's a certain way to perform spirituality and prayer in a very specific way that everybody in the group vibes with, and that everyone knows that you're conforming through what you say and through how you pray. But everybody doing it in unison is kind of like, I'm not sure that is something that actually happens in real life, but in a TV series, it certainly adds to the eeriness and kind of like the ritual chanting of it. Now, the scenes that are really interesting to me are the scenes of what many groups would call a love feast or Eucharist meal after. Obviously, they just had a Eucharist / communion meal, and then they're having this wonderful, joyful, colorful picnic outside. It's kind of reminiscent of the movie Midsommar, but it also is this like bubbly, joyful thing. This is precisely where you will invite people to join in. You will probably not invite people to join into these services, especially the exclusive brethren. They're exclusive brethren because they don't invite people into their services. Their services are closed. But this is where you will invite people. You come in from the outside and you're not used to this. So your instant reflex is to think, this is harmful, this is oppressive. And then as you see how happy and wonderful and joyful, and there's cotton candy, and you see how great it is, then your defenses start to melt. And that's when you experience love bombing, and that's when you are drawn into such a community. Now, I will say that communities that are actively trying to proselytize and who are relatively new and have all this new radical energy tend to be some of the most like extreme and controlling. There's now groups that are older that have been around a while, and it's kind of their religiosity is baked into the culture. Even if they're highly separate from the world, it is a slightly different thing because there isn't this new energy of newfound radicalism. So especially if people are newly converted, newly radical, but also if they're actively trying to make converts, these are some of the red flags. Now, you will see, I think that in general, looking at the way gender is portrayed in many of these scenes, what the authors, showrunners, filmmakers are trying to tell us is that this isn't something that is too different from anything we've already seen. So let's talk about different religious groups that may have inspired the series. Well, my computer is a little stuck here at the moment. So one of them that I can think of is you gotta watch any documentary series on the Gloria Vale group in New Zealand. They are very much like this. They are a communal group, and they dress in a very similar way and have very similar practices, including eating together at every meal, living together, and in its essence being like a saved radical separatist group. The exclusive brethren, from what I understand, live close together, but they don't necessarily live together. I would say that probably Gloria Vale and the exclusive brethren would be the major influences for what's going on here, because I have extensive ethnographic experience in Amish and Mennonite groups. And while there are certain aspects that are similar, I do not really see many connections, if that makes sense. Amish and Mennonites generally do not live together. Hutterite groups do, but you can go on YouTube and watch vlogs by people who live on Hutterite communities, and they're not actively trying to make converts, and they're also not going down the path of increased religious radicalism, if that makes sense. So yeah, Gloria Vale, a group that was started in the probably 1980s by one charismatic person and convicted sexual offender named Hopeful Christian, I think is his name. He started this group. They all live in the commune. They essentially believe that if you leave, you're going to go to hell and you're no longer saved. Plus, they dress very similar to this, except that they all wear the same blue dress or blue shirt and pants. Except when they get married, then they're allowed to wear pink. So that would be a very similar one. I would think that in terms of aesthetics, this is probably most similar to Exclusive Brethren and possibly the Bruderhof. So the Bruderhof originated in World War II Germany. They were in fellowship with the Hutterite Christian communities for a while and now are their own thing. They tend to dress very simply and they live together in a community, but they're not necessarily the most fervently radically religious. Yeah, they are radically religious in that they live a communal life, but they don't have like the fundamentalist radical spirituality that you will see in some of the other groups like Gloria Vale. So that's one potential influence, the Bruderhof, in terms of just the wide variety of colors and also the outfits, I think are quite similar compared to Gloria Vale. There's also a group called Charity Christian Fellowship. They did not live together in communes, but they were kind of like an offshoot of newly revitalized and saved Amish and Mennonites and a fundamentalist Baptist leader. And they were an extremely high control religious group that would hold to these kind of gendered beliefs, that would have a strong influence on having as many children as possible and being as radically separated from the world as possible and dressing like this. Especially the jumpers. We had a name for those. We call them the charity jumpers. So like the dress that you would, like the homeschool jumper, like a sleeveless dress that you wear over a shirt, is a charity Christian thing. So that's one possible influence. And yes, Charity Christian Fellowship, like I'll probably link in the comments below, but they have incredibly violent stories of like sexual trafficking, physical violence, very much like this radical fervor, highly saved energy. I know a lot of, like, I'm very familiar with this movement and many survivors, and we'll be very happy to share like stories that you can look up and research. But in terms of like the organization of the group, like the gender segregation, but a bunch of different things that I believe are signaled in the series, such as the quiverful belief of having large families, having strong fatherly authority, including the right to discipline and punish, having, the woman here in this picture is pregnant, so having as many children as possible and separating your children from all worldly influences. And we also have a little glimpse of the leaders of this community. Christopher Eccleston plays, I think, the main leader figure. I think it's really well depicted. Like, I think they did their research. And the fact that it starts with this bubbly, lovely scene, everything is pastel and bright, and there's all the yummy food, and you see all the women in the kitchen making awesome food. This is what draws people. This is why people join these communities, because they feel alone in the modern world. And while they may initially flinch, the love bombing really helps you settle into the belief system and then just accept everything that you are told. Because it feels different. It feels special. It feels radical and unique, and like you finally have a place to belong, and that it provokes certain emotions. And yeah, so let's move on to discussing. So this is like kind of the portrayal of the group, screenshots from the series. Okay, so let's move on to the next series of images that I have. So very soon after this, we have a series of events. I'm not going to give you spoilers. I'm going to discuss the religion of the group without giving too many spoilers, but there will be, I guess, some. If you're going to be talking about the religious practices, you're gonna hear about what the show depicts. So there are some scenes where a woman, a mother, is desperate to help her child, and she is told that this particular thing is a man's job, and she's specifically told not to do so, even though as a mother she wants to follow her motherly instincts. There's a strong belief that men are to rescue and protect, and men are given all the credit for doing so, and a woman who disobeys the leader's instructions and also disobeys the group's norms as to what her role is, even though she wants to really, she's desperate, she needs to save her child, she is the one who plays the primary role in saving her child, yet she is disciplined afterwards. A woman who notices her disobedience, an older woman, notices her disobedience, and then later goes and confronts her and tells her off, and also tells her, hey, I saw you walking the forest, do not do that. So what's happening here? Leadership in communities like this is diffused. Some of these things may not even be in the rules, but there are unspoken rules. And when you are told something and you are seen as potentially rebellious and disobedient, that is when the axe is brought down, the rod is brought down, and you are told to stay in your place. Now, if you have been paying attention to the sermons, if you're a good follower, you're already supposed to be really humble and be kind of filled with guilt and condemnation by default. You're told how sinful you are, how your desires and inclinations are sinful, and you are rebellious. And so when someone comes to then rebuke you one-on-one, as this older woman does the younger woman, you are supposed to really feel it. It's supposed to really hurt. It's not, you just need to say a little thing and that person knows what to do and flinches. It's like if you're already tensed up, if somebody tries to, even pretends to try and strike you, you're already flinching. So that is what a confrontation like this does. When you're told, hey, you weren't submissive and you weren't staying in your role as a woman. Often, as I said, power is diffused in these communities. People are policing each other, and women are policing women. So you think of it as, male authority, patriarchal. But really it's women who enforce this. So for example, this kind of confrontation could be, hey, I noticed that your skirts aren't as long as we think they should be. I think you're not being modest. I think you're causing the men to sin. These kinds of one-on-one meetings are very, very common in different high control religious groups, in some Mennonite groups. You might imagine, this is a nice way of doing it already because it's a woman coming to talk to you. Imagine if you are a woman and you're a young woman, 18 years old, 14 years old, and you're called to be confronted for your sins and spoken to by a group of older male leaders. And you are alone, and there's not one person there to defend you, and they're all telling you that you're not being obedient, you're being insubordinate. Now imagine then the humiliation of maybe being hauled up in front of everyone and told off in that way. So let's just move over to this different image that I have of one of the ritual council meetings, or whatever you call it, where the sin of one community member is kind of addressed in front of everyone else. So there's this moment of confrontation and community discipline that definitely reflects the disciplinary methods used in high control religious groups. Now usually, like the story starts with the communion service. A lot of Christian groups believe that you should go through kind of like discipline, confession, and penitence before, so that you don't partake unworthily. So it's really interesting seeing someone who broke the rules in a specific way and then is hauled in front of everyone else, disciplined, told off, and then subject to punishments, psychological terror, actually, yeah, spoiler, but there's a little punishment room that's going on here so that they'll pray and repent. I mean, this was something that Gothard had in his training centers in the IVLP organization. I think that the Ducker family actually had a little prayer room, like a little closet that you're supposed to go in and pray, and people are talking about how something like that is often and could be used to essentially lock someone in there to punish them and make them pray their sins away. So there's that going on, and this plot line is not fully resolved in the series. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the scenes that we see of people together. So what I'm seeing in the series is that everyone lives together. There's a church building, but there are also little houses or dwellings in the compound. And these houses and dwellings are where some of the scenes happen. We also see all the women working together in the kitchen and cooking and wearing kind of matching but coordinating clothes in a very aesthetic trad way. And then we also see the male workspace, which is a sawmill in a very industrial setting where the men work. So there's a very, very typical gender division of labor, but I found it really interesting because I feel like it's almost stereotypical. Yeah, sawmill is sawmill is something that definitely is a way for a high control, gender segregated religious group, the kind of business that they would have, and then a male only office space. Women do not work in those kinds of spaces. Women do the cooking and cleaning and laundry. Gloria Vale survivors talk about the fact that they spend hours and hours doing hundreds of loads of laundry and ironing and scrubbing the floors, to the extent that, a woman who's just giving birth might only have 2 weeks to recover before she's back out working again. The amount of work, the hours of labor, completely unpaid because it's for the community. It's backbreaking. It's brutal. It's not like this cute, trad thing where everybody is just really sweet and everybody's just frolicking in the fields. That's not really the case. Like, the work in these kinds of communities is intense, to say the least. Alright, so the concept of separation comes up in some of the screenshots that I shared. The woman who's kind of telling off the other woman, she says, separation is our sole principle. Someone who breaks the rules is punished. And then we also have the leader saying that pornography, having access to smartphones, to the internet, opens up a pathway of pornography. And that is something that, again, it's a hyper stringent mainstream Christian / evangelical / conservative fundamentalist Protestant belief. And that's the kind of group that I'm most familiar with. People who believe the same as mainstream Christians, but who just believe it more fervently, who will actually practice it and try to be logically consistent within their beliefs. So they're very opposed to any kind of communication with the outside world, against magazines, comics for children. Everything has to be really from within the group and has to be considered godly enough. Now, this is something with which I'm quite familiar. Our group did not necessarily have any rules, but there were definitely a lot of sermons about ungodly influences. There were a fair number of people who completely did not allow their children to watch television. Well, you wouldn't even have a television, but even to watch films on your devices. I know children who were forbidden to read storybooks that were not religious books. Reading was forbidden. Card games are forbidden. So there are many things that are not allowed because they are considered worldly. This was like totally normal and was also an extension of evangelical beliefs about demons, about harmful spiritual influences, but also things that could lead to worldliness and rebellion. So we have this scene where the characters go to a hospital and everyone around them is on a smartphone, and the woman is not even really allowed to look at what those other people are doing. She's kind of told off if she's a little bit too curious. And she seems very, and this is a part that I think is a little bit, I'm not sure how realistic this is. She seems very ignorant. She doesn't really know what those things are. The main character, she does not even know what Google is in a clip that I've seen. That means that she must have grown up entirely within this group, which would mean that this group has been around for a while. Very possible. Many of these groups have been around for decades. She's a relatively young woman, probably in her 20s. So this group might have been started in the 1990s or 2000s. She has no idea what she's looking at, and she's kind of curious, but she's also very well trained. She's trained to be obedient and to know that smartphones are sinful and against the rules. This control of information is like it's predicated on protection. It's predicated on someone else watching out for you and making these rules for your own good and also for your own spiritual well-being, because if smartphones are the pathway to pornography and pornography will lead you to hell, the best thing for you is to be in a disciplinary group that's going to punish you for your own temporary well-being, give you temporary affliction for your eternal well-being. That's actually something that's said in Augustine's City of God. He's like, masters should discipline their enslaved subjects by word or blow for their everlasting happiness. So you're told that this is for your own good. Here's something really interesting. There are actually people kissing in the background of that hospital scene. It's for your own good. You're being protected. So why would you complain? Why would you want to disobey? Disobedience is rebellion, which is witchcraft, which is going to lead you to hell. I see this very standard fundamentalist Christian view of separation throughout, and I also see these strongly gendered teachings. So let me pull up some of the scenes of the husband and wife who are main characters in this series. Now, there are certain things that I feel a little contrived for the TV show. The scene where the husband tells her, Ephesians 5 says submit to your husbands. Like, that's not something that someone who already knows this is going to say. It's something that they put in the film for the sake of the audience to know the context of what's happening here. It would be a lot more subtle, because in a group like that, all you need to be is even given a look, or even given the slight suggestion that you're not being submissive, and that's enough to kind of put you in your place. He didn't need to quote the whole verse, but he did that for the sake of the audience, which is fine. Here's something really interesting. Content warning. There is a scene between the couple after they've gone through an extremely harrowing event, like life and death, and the husband's like, we don't have to, and she doesn't say anything, and then they do. And this is very, very typical. This is a mainstream evangelical belief that you essentially don't say no, because saying no is basically a sin. 1 Corinthians 7, they would say, says that a husband has full authority over the wife's body, and the wife has full authority, so you must not in return, which is never reciprocal, but the idea is that you must never say no to your spouse unless it's for a temporary greater spiritual good. Again, it's a matter of interpretation, but this is what Sheila Gregoire in her research calls obligation sex. Very, very typical. Yes, it is very harmful. Yes, it is coercive. Yes, it is a form of marital sexual violence mapped onto different forms of coercion, such as social coercion, interpersonal coercion, threatened physical coercion, and physical coercion. This means that coercion operates at many different levels. Believing that you don't have the ability to say no, or that it is unrighteous to say no, or that there are eternal consequences for saying no, is not a yes. It's not consensual, and therefore it is non-consensual, and therefore it is harmful. It also causes different things like sexual pain and disconnection, disembodiment, inauthenticity of self, and yes, it is a form of abuse, but it's a form of abuse that is normalized and very, very mainstream, that for many years was even legal. So I will say that. So there's a situation where, you have the complete authority of the husband over the wife, including in sexual matters, and also so that they will produce as many children as she is physically capable of producing for as long as she can produce it. When I was watching the Gloria Vale documentary, I did notice this because there were, if birth control is considered worldly, then having as many children as possible is your way of being more godly and more separate from the world. And yes, this does come at a cost. Yes, this is physically debilitating. Yes, I think there are, and I believe I know of people who suffered severe health consequences because of their husband's imposition of these beliefs, but also women's internalization of these beliefs, from severe anemia to devastating lifelong consequences. Michelle Duggar, as she was giving birth to child after child in consecutive years, she could not even lie down at night to sleep. She had to sleep upright because she was in constant pain. And yet her husband, and she also believed that she should, her husband had her having continuous children, and this was something that she believed was her responsibility as well. All right, so this is the world in which, this is the religious world of the Unchosen series, a world of strict separation, no access to outside information, no access to information technology or the internet, strict gender segregation, strict rules, punishment if you do not follow these rules that are based on strong and stringent interpretations of what's considered godly spirituality. Gender roles, women being forced to submit even sexually, sexual exploitation, reproductive violence, reproductive exploitation, and definitely what you're not seeing is that 100% they're hitting their kids. 100% there's going to be very violent spiritual discipline, physical discipline going on top of the psychological and spiritual abuse. And this is very like I watch, and that's what they're trying to tell you is going on in this specific fictional world. They're probably educating their children themselves so that they're not corrupted by the world's education. They're probably raising their children to follow in their footsteps and not go into the outside world. There's a strong sense of excommunication if you do not follow the rules, and therefore you will lose your salvation. So there's this exclusivity that's going on as well. All right, so I'm very interested in watching episodes 2 to 4. Don't know if I'm going to be, I don't know if there'll be more expository scenes that tell you more about religion as shown in this group. I don't know if there's going to be more to discuss, but I will be staying tuned for the plot, for the drama, for the sheer entertainment of it all, and then potentially doing a second reaction video after. We're gonna see. All right, my name is Rebecca. Please subscribe if you're interested in discussing religion, gender, and violence, and I hope to see you again soon.